Hey there, guys, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. And welcome back to the second devlog for my game, which has actually got a name now. I've named it Project Shard for now, but as you can see, it might change in the future. But I mean, I think it's good for now. And the first thing I want to show off to start this devlog is something you've already, you've just seen, the new menu screen, which now comes with sound effects. I mean, they're very rudimentary sound effects for now. Probably will change in the future, but you know, it's something for now. So this is a quick note from me during editing, which is that I've just realized that I did not capture the sound from the game. So there are sound effects there. You just can't hear them. Pretend they're there. Pretend there's a little button clicking noise whenever I click a button. But yeah, I was dumb. Anyway, back to the video. And the other thing I want to show you actually does involve me starting up the game a bit. I'm not going to show too much of it to avoid spoilers, but if we load into a save now, there is an intro cutscene here and a dialogue system that I've been working on. I mean, this is all you're going to see of it for now. It's where's my thing? There it is. It's a work in progress, 100%. But I mean, this is my sound effects manager right now. It's very, very basic. It's just got a couple functions to load in and play different sound effects. I was actually having some lag with playing the dialogue sound effects, but I found that instead of playing it and stopping it every time the dialogue box comes up, I found it actually doesn't have the lag if I just play the effect right at the start when the dialogue box is loaded in, and then just change the volume of it so it's silent when the dialogue isn't being typed out, and it has, you know, it's not silent when it's not being typed out. And I found that actually reduces the lag quite a bit. But as I was saying, right now what I'm doing is, where is it? I'm working on a sort of cutscene to introduce the game, as this is roughly what it looks like right now. If I load it in, this is what sort of happens after the intro slides. But what I'm doing is sort of working on this, and also I'm beginning to plan out and work on the first actual area that you're going to explore, an area called Xperia, which I don't really have any maps or tile sets for it now, but it's sort of going to be split into... So the way I'm going to be working on designing these levels, basically, is I've split the game into areas, which makes sense for Metroidvania, but then each area is also split into its smaller sub areas, and I'm going to be taking those sub areas sort of one at a time, if that makes sense. Some examples from Xperia, which is the surface of the planet, really. It's like the most basic area. It's mainly like grassy plains and hills. One of the sub areas is a place called the crash site, which is basically where you crash land on the planet. Another one is a place called Floraxis Forest, which is basically a mini forest area. It's right on the border of Xperia, next to the next area I've got planned called Kakaris, which is basically a giant jungle, to say the least. And then the final one I'm going to tell you about is a place called Givoru Tunnels, which is basically these tunnels dug out by creatures that live on the surface area of Xperia, and that leads into an area called Brinadia, which is like the sort of like the Brinstar of this game, the Forgotten Crossroads. It's like a connection area that... Sorry about that, guys. A bee just flew into my room. So got the guy out, don't worry. He's all good now. Got him out. Got my window closed, so shouldn't be bothering us again. But as I was saying, I don't really want to go down the Metroid route of having like elevators or shuttles or teleporters to transport between areas. I want to go sort of more with like the Hollow Knight Animal Well route, from what I can tell from it, where it's sort of more like there's some transition rooms and it's more blurred between the individual areas. And that's what the purpose of sub areas like the Floraxis Forest is, where it transitions from that sort of hilly grassland area in Xperia to the more dense jungle area of Kakarus through like the forest area. And there's another one like that in Xperia called Mountains Approach, where it sort of transitions from more grassland to heading up a mountain as you enter an area, sort of mining and crystals. But yeah, and then so what I'm going to be doing is sort of, I'm going to be finishing up the intro cutscene, which I probably won't show too much of because I don't want to give away too many spoilers about the game. But what I will do is show you sort of my process of coming up with like tile sets and coming up with some, you know, designs for what the area is going to look like. I actually have if I remember, I'll put a photo up. I've got a couple of drawings, if I get them up in front of me now, of what I'm planning on, like sort of the crash site sub area to look like. And because it's where you crash land on the planet, it's where you first really get control of the character. So you don't even have a weapon yet. So any enemies there aren't really going to be ones that are like a threat. They're not really going to have much of a way to... The player's not really going to be able to die there. And it's going to be a fairly linear area, just sort of so you can get used to platforming and stuff in it. But, well, I say it's going to be a linear area. I'm planning on making... Well, actually, yeah, it is probably going to be a linear area. I was considering having some split paths in it, but sort of introducing split paths and non-linearity is going to be in like the second area where you actually get the sword and the armor. But yeah, that's what my plans going forward for the next little bit are. One thing I wanted to show actually was if I quickly go into the you might be able to see it here. If I quickly go into the world scene, load it up, as you can see, my mouse is still here because I never went into the start menu scene. But something I have been doing is creating a lot more sort of visual like things for the upgrades. So for example, the spin core actually has a upgrade now, and I've been working on the logbook. So you can see there's a sort of an actual book that pops up, and I created this new tab to go with the two old ones. This is the player's inventory tab. And at the start, it just shows a portrait of the player and their name, which is Gemma Kesho is the name of the character. But then if I come down here and pick up the sword and the armor and just deal with this guy quickly, as you can see, it now shows you in your armor the type of sword you have. I don't know why I'm actually pointing at my screen. It shows you the armor, and it says ancient armor because that's what kind of armor you have. It shows you your sword and tells you what type of sword it is. This here is your health and basically a sort of charm system. So basically the way you get health upgrades in this is where you'll get a charm, and it's basically a fragment of this whole thing. And so as you collect each fragment, gives you 100 extra health. And once this whole medallion is built up, it means you have max health. And then here you can see these 4 small dots. And if I show you what those are for by coming over here and collecting the spin core, or well, it's called the spin core now. It still says spin gel because I haven't actually updated it because this is still a prototype. But now you can see the spin core here in your inventory, and it might you might see that it looked different than it did when it was out in the world, and that's because this is basically the core when it's active instead of, I guess, not being active. Yeah, that makes sense in my head. But either way, returning to the main menu, which you may have seen, you can skip by just pressing the space bar. Oh, there's one more thing I did that I need to show you. I've done a lot of work on this since the last devlog. I've put a lot of new stuff in, but you may see here, this used to say keyboard config, and that says control config because, well, yeah, you can still configure all your keyboard controls. I have also added now controller support, as you can see here, and you can configure all of those controls to your liking as well. But yeah, return, quit. That's basically everything I've done so far, I think. Pretty sure it's everything I've done. But yeah, what I'm planning on doing next is doing more like sort of starting to design what the area is going to look like, where the player lands, what Xperia is going to look like, starting to build that out. I haven't quite decided yet if I'm going to build the game out sort of area by area. So I build all of Xperia and then all of Brenadia, let's say, and then all of Kakaris. Or if I want to go through and build the areas sort of as they become relevant, if that makes sense. So, because I do have a sort of semi-plot line, quest line in mind, like a proper sequence that the player could follow. And there's going to be a character I came up with. I think his name is Ethan. And he's sort of like a guide of sorts. And he basically sits up at your base camp in Xperia. And you can talk to him and ask him if you're stuck. Sort of, he'll tell you like a hint or say like, "Oh, I saw this interesting rock formation." Or well, say when you get the moon boots. I think I showed them last time, where you can slow gravity with them. He might say something like, "Oh, I saw this really deep drop in Brenadia. If only there was some way to lower gravity to make it easier for you to fall down." And then you've just gotten the moon boots and you have that, so you think, "Oh, I should probably look around in that area for this drop because that's probably the way forward." And so I have a sort of quest line in mind that the player can follow. And I don't know if I want to build out areas like that as they come through, but I am also thinking of doing it area by area, because I do want to follow the sort of design philosophy that I've seen in Hollow Knight quite a bit, where all major areas in the game have more than one place to go. Because when you get the let me think of an upgrade that I've shown you. When you get the flash boots, not the flash boots, the moon boots, that's the one I showed you, for example, there could be two separate areas where one of them is like a long drop and one of them is literally just a ledge that is too high for you to jump up to. Because with the lowered gravity, it has the consequence of having a higher jump with that as well. So there's two critical paths that you could take with that. Both of them would lead to the next story beat, but either one of them could be taken. What I also do want to do is I am designing this sequence that the player can follow, but I am also wanting to sort of heavily lean into the non-linearity area of it as well, where I'm going to try and make it so there's always a way you can get to somewhere without having without necessarily having the items that you've forgotten if you had followed the intended sequence up to there. I've already added a couple tricks in actually that the player can do that I won't actually tell you what they are or how to do them, because they're sort of like the Super Metroid Shine Spark, for example, where you don't really know about it until you get to that bit with the bird, where the bird shows you how to do it. It's sort of tricks like that that allow you to get around the world without having other upgrades and sort of stuff like that. And I actually have a couple upgrades that do have hidden second functionalities like that. That also, I think some of them make combat easier instead of sort of platforming, because, well, I wanted to make the combat interesting and give the player lots of options with it, but also not really make it too complicated that you need to really understand. Like, people who don't really understand how all these different things can work together and synergies can still like get through it quite easily. So, well, I say easily, I mean, it's obviously the combat in some areas are meant to be a challenge, but you know what I mean. I didn't want to make it so complicated that people who didn't really understand how the things could work together in a synergy get stuck and can't really continue, and so just stop with the game altogether. I don't really want that to happen. But yeah, so I'm thinking of making it on an area by area basis, and then sort of once I've got the basic level design built out, then implement the sort of storyline quest system on top of that. Because I am definitely looking to lean into the idea of you can take on this world any way you want. You don't have to follow what Ethan suggests to you. You can, even from the get-go, after you get the after you have the armor and the sword, you can go to, I think it's 3 different areas that you can go to. Obviously, some of them will be a lot more limited because they are more designed to be late game areas when you have more mobility options. Like Kakaris, for example, is a much more vertical area. It's supposed to be sort of where you're sort of in the giant trees, sort of going up and platforming between them. And so that's more of a late game area when you have the more vertical, actually maybe not really late game, more sort of mid game area where you have those more sort of vertical movement abilities. But even in Xperia, I think there's like 11, I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's 11 sub areas that I've planned out for Xperia. Any one of them you could go to, and the sub areas aren't necessarily going to be small. I think the smallest one is probably going to be the crash site because it's just meant to be an area for you to get used to your movement. But even that, I think right now we've got like 3 or 4 rooms in, and the rooms, as you can see, aren't small in any sense. If I quickly grab the collision shape to highlight it of the first room in the in this little test demo world I've made, you can see the collision shape is quite big. So the rooms aren't small in any semblance of the word. So these sub areas are gonna basically, what I'm hoping to do is provide like a big world for you to explore and really explore at your own pace. But then the reason the character of Ethan is there, and not mandatory as well, like sort of the pulse visor upgrade I showed in the last devlog, where it highlights breakable blocks. Neither that or talking to Ethan is mandatory. You don't need to talk to him at all to beat the game, or to get any of the endings. So I'm planning multiple endings as well. But yeah, you don't need to talk to Ethan to beat the game. He's just there for people who want to, people who need a little bit more guidance to get through the game without getting lost. And really, actually, he's only gonna basically lead you to the most basic ending you could get, where with the like bare minimum you need to reach the credits, which would be technically beating the game. But if you want to get any of the other endings, there'd be like more work exploring, and you can dig more into the lore at your own pace. That's basically the experience that I'm trying to go for. I mean, how well I execute it, we'll see. But hopefully I can pull it off decently enough that it creates a fun game for you guys to hopefully play. I mean, I would put up a Steam page, so if you wanted to, you could wishlist it to show your support, but I don't really have the ability to do that right now. I'm looking to in the future, but I mean, yeah, let me know down in the comments what you think of it so far, sort of what you think about the art direction I'm going in, because, I mean, for example, I know I keep loading it up, but with this sort of title screen and how this looks, I'm really happy with how this looks and the sort of art direction I've been going in right now. So, I mean, let me know what you think of it. I feel like it's not the most complex. Most of the visual effects actually come from using shaders, like this fog here, which I actually got from... the fog shader was not easy to make. Actually, it's not really that complex. If I quickly show you the fog shader code, if I go into resources, intro fog shader, where's my mouse gone? It's not that, why is my mouse that's weird, I don't know why that happens. It's not that long of a shader, it's just getting the effect to look right and tweaking those values that is the thing that takes so much time. But I mean, yeah, I think I'm going to make some new tiles, because this is basically just a test tile. But how the player looks as well, for example, and as you can see, my player scene is very big. Very big. It's not really optimized that well. I'm going to have to optimize it at some point in the future, but I mean, it's good enough now. But as I was saying, how the player looks, if I find my morph controller and get them in their idle state, quickly turn off the point lights so you can actually see them properly. Like this, I'm really proud of this artwork here. The positions are a bit off of the actual pieces because the way I've animated the player actually is I've split them into 3 bits, being head, torso, and legs. That way, for example, if they're doing a running attack, it doesn't have any sort of jitter with it. They can be actually blinking constantly, like a normal human being would. And it basically makes it easier to animate in the long run. It may seem more complicated when you look at the scene tree here of all of this, where you have like the torso armor, which has all of these different pieces to it. But I mean, this is how actually I got the, if I come down into the leg armor, you can see here how I got the, if I quickly turn off the normal legs, how I got the sort of boots to be able to flash up when you, well, get those boots. How I got the sort of, what's the word? The like visual, sort of the visual information and the visual feedback when you get the upgrade that your character is changing and growing stronger. That's how I sort of did that, by just basically separating the components and layering them on top of each other. There's probably a much more efficient way to do it, but I mean, it works for me. That's what's important for now. I can always get it sort of figured out later on, sort of more optimized, but for now I think it works. I mean, I said earlier, like, what, 10 odd minutes ago, that I was gonna start mapping out the next area, but I think most of this devlog is probably gonna end up being just me talking about sort of what my plans are, because I mean, getting the intro cutscene finished and beginning to map out the next area is gonna take a long time, really, because obviously individual features like getting the logbook working, the dialogue system, they take time, but I feel like with the style of game I'm making with a Metroidvania, the systems aren't the hard part to do. It's getting the world design, getting the world building and the lore right that is the difficult bit, for me especially. So that's probably what's going to take up most of my time with this, because most of the underlying systems I feel are pretty solid right now. I mean, there's some that I need to touch up and work on. I haven't even started making a map in the logbook yet, because I wanted to make Xperia before I did that, so I'd have an actual area to design the map for. Map-wise, I'm planning on making it sort of like a mix between Hollow Knight's map and Metroid's map. So one character I made up basically goes around the world making campsites, and when you hit a campsite in each area, it basically fills in any rooms you've been to on your map. But there's another character who's a cartographer who sort of works like the map stations in Metroid, where it basically fills out a small portion of your map, kind of poorly, but it sort of gives you an idea of what the general sort of layout of the area looks like. I'm also planning on adding a sort of God Home type area, sort of boss rush mode. And as a character, it'll let you enter that, but I haven't really started that yet because I haven't designed any bosses. Although I do have a plan for one. A thing called the Dirt Carver, or like the Alpha Carver or something like that. It's like going to be a really simple early boss, sort of like Massive Moss Charger from Hollow Knight. Basically, you just move back and forth and jump out the ground. But it's going to be it's going to be simple, probably going to be the first one I make, sort of just as a test of how boss fights could work. But I will be working on that later. Now what I'm going to do is finally stop ranting on about my plans and go work on sort of mapping out a basic tile set and what the first room is going to look like, because that room sort of appears in the intro cutscene as you crash down on the planet. So I sort of need to get what that looks like. I might do just a long video of me making a bunch of art for it at some point, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead with that, and I'll catch up when I have an update on it. So, let's do this. So, guys, as you can see here, I've done. Well, it doesn't look like much here, but this is the product of many hours worth of work now in getting just these 2 rooms built. But I have put a lot of effort into them. It might look a bit weird here in the editor, but I mean, hopefully, I'm going to actually record the sound effects this time, because I realized in editing that I did not actually record the sound effects for the previous segment, but if I load this up, hopefully it records the sound effects. But I mean, even if it doesn't, you can see what I have going here as the general look that I want for this first area. So this is basically what the room that you crash in is roughly going to look like. And if you can hear them, there's like thunder with the lightning, obviously. And if we come into this more darker cave area, which you might be able to notice actually in the background, I have added parallax scrolling in, which took more time than I care to admit to get working, but I'm glad I did. But as I was saying, if we come into this more cave area here, and I am quiet for a little bit. As you may be able to hear, I've added some sound effects for jumping around and walking, but specifically on grass. I may need to make it a little bit louder. It's quite hard to hear right now. I mean, it's playing. It's definitely there, but it's a little bit quiet right now. I'm going to need to make that louder. But, I mean, yeah, this is what I've been doing. I ended up, as you can see here, there's like 7 different layers being rendered in right now, because there's the like tiles layer, and then behind that is these background objects like these mushrooms, the vines hanging down, the rocks, the stalactites because they're hanging from the ceiling, the stuff like the bushes. All of that is in the next layer back, so it's behind the player. Then there is the close background tile set layer, which it doesn't actually have anything in yet, but is going to be for stuff like larger bushes and stuff like that. And then there's the background tile layer, which is the background tiles that you can see that I'm standing in front of here. Then there's only 2 parallax layers in this scene, which is the just the complete black background and sort of the cave walls around it. And then in here there is 3 parallax layers because there's the mountains, the blue sky, and the grassy field. But then there's also the lightning that's rendered sort of in the middle of that. And if you can't, you might not be able to tell. I don't know if it's gonna pick it up all that well. But there's also this the thunder sound for the lightning when it strikes is actually directional. So it's plays in a certain direction when you have headphones on. If it's to your right, it'll be playing on your right, and it's louder if you're close to it. And actually, one final layer I forgot to mention is the foreground fog layer, which, I mean, as you can see, just applies a fog effect using a fragment shader over the top of it, which is basically just an ambient thing, sort of like how it's darker in this cave area. And the player does actually have a small light around them, which you may be able to tell, which I think is actually quite... It makes sense that someone going to explore a mysterious planet would have a light with them. But to reduce lag with, say, the light from these lightning strikes, if I wait for one, there, you can see it lit up. The lights and the art from the lightning strikes aren't actually rendered in when I'm not in the room that they're in. Same with the parallax background layers here. These 3 layers aren't rendered in when I'm in this room, just like how these 2 aren't rendered in when I'm in this room. And if I quickly come and show you sort of how all of that is done. So you can see in here with the background sprites, they're all labeled stuff like CS1/L, CS1/L2, so on. And then with the layers, there's CS1, CS1/1, CS1/2. And so in the rooms, each room has its own code. So there's CS1 and CS2 right now, which are basically... They're basically used for the game to know what room you're in, which then that's set to a variable called inventory.current room, which wouldn't be in here. It would be in the code for the parallax background layer, where it checks if it goes and loops through when there's the change background signal sent in, which is connected to this change background function. Which is basically when you enter a new room and it... What did I do? Change background not declared in... Alright, fix that. So when you enter a new room and it fixes... What do you mean it's not declared? Oh my god. I need to fix this. So, I've got some Skittles on my desk with me now, because I'm hungry. But, basically, when in the player script, if I come back to the camera checker area entered function, if I can find it, here it is. It emits a signal, change room, which while this is the wrong scene to load up. If I come back into the Xperia scene, while the room transition with where it quickly fades to black and then fades back in again. While that is happening, it emits that signal, which then is received by this script here, which when that signal is received, it quickly loops through all of the children, so all of these parallax layers, and just, if whatever the current room is in the name, so say you're in room CS1, if CS1, CS1_1, CS1_2, all of those will be visible because CS1 is in their name. Otherwise, it's not visible. So CS2 and CS2_1 is they're both invisible. And the reason all of these have to be separate layers is, if I quickly make these two invisible, for an example, you can see, for example, this layer here is the grass, this layer here is the mountains, and this one is the blue sky background. And the reason they have to be like this is if you look at here with the scale variable, they're different as you go through, which creates that differing speed as it scrolls, which is actually what is making the parallax effect. But, I mean, yeah, this is what... I think this first room this first room here took me like 3 hours to make all the art for it, because I have to obviously make all the art for this tile set. There's a completely different tile set. Well, I say completely different, a slightly different tile set for the background. All of these different background objects. Placing them down isn't really an issue because, I mean, I basically just go through and do a bunch of mushrooms, then the vines. Then I put in a bunch of grass, like these grass tufts, then these berry bushes, then the rocks, and then the stalactites, and I do it sort of like that. So actually creating the rooms isn't too bad. The longest bit is creating the artwork, especially these backgrounds, because each room is going to really have to have its own background artwork, especially since I want some rooms to have, sort of like in Hollow Knight, stuff like giant statues in the background, sort of lore related items. So each room is going to have its own background, but I mean, you can see here from the art for the background isn't really that complicated, but I mean, to be fair, it doesn't have to be, because it's, well, especially for example in this cave scene where it is more simple, there's a lot more stuff in the foreground that you're more likely to be focusing on that is detailed, and the important part for the background in this scene is to just be sort of more broad to cover the whole room, basically. I mean, the rooms that are going to have the stuff like statues and lore-related items are going to be more complex to draw. So going to take longer, but just simple connecting rooms like this that don't really have much, that they basically just exist to connect areas. They will have, I mean, I say this just exists to connect areas. This room is sort of like a basic movement tutorial where you get to run around, and eventually these pits here are going to have some spikes in them. It's probably going to be one of the only like 2 ways you can die. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to put like over here like an enemy, but it's going to be a basic one that just walks back and forth along the ceiling, so the chance of you dying from it are very low. But it's basically just a room where you can test out sort of the movement physics, get used to them, and I mean, yeah, this sort of sets up the atmosphere for this first area as well. It's sort of meant to be mysterious and a bit eerie when you first come here, but I'm probably going to have sort of the fog and the lightning clear up sort of later on if you were to return to the area, because it would have, you know, cleared up, and by then it's sort of like I suppose a tone shift is the best way to put it in how sort of the player is in the world, if that makes sense, where you're not really, by the time you come back here, if you do, you wouldn't really be the same level of, I guess, weakness is the best way to put it. You'd be a lot stronger than when you came back here. But I mean, yeah, as I was saying, that is what I've been doing for the past, like, I mean, this room alone took me like 3 hours. This one probably only took me about 2, so that's about 5. But then getting all the sound effects set up was separate from that. Took about like 5 hours in of itself. So this is about the past like 8 to 10 hours of work just making this. But I mean, I think it's definitely worth it. I feel like, I mean, let me know what you think down in the comments. But from both a sound and visual perspective, I'm really happy with how this has come out. I think this is definitely the visual style I'm going to be going with, creating areas in the future, because it's simple, it's detailed to the point where, you know, you can really understand what all the stuff is, but it's simple enough that it's easy really to draw more going forward, especially with the tile sets of, instead of making all the tiles have this like rocky pattern on, I had the rocky pattern on the edge, and that just fades into basically one color. But it doesn't really feel to me sort of bland and basic, even though it is just that one really block color, because of all of these things like these mushrooms going out of it, the vines, these more boulders, and like sort of the scratch marks on the rocks. They sort of just serve to break that up and provide some variation. But yeah, as I was saying, that's what I've been working with. Let me know down in the comments what you think. And that is where I'm going to be ending this devlog for today. I hope you enjoyed watching. I am really enjoying working on this project. Yeah, I can't wait till... I might see about trying to get a... I probably won't really focus on this until I've got more of the first area set up, but try and get some sort of demo potentially. Some sort of playable demo that I could put on like itch or something. Or maybe even create a scene page for it if I'm able to at that point. But yeah, I'm really enjoying working on this project. I'm really excited to see how it grows and develops, because I'm sure all of this is going to be vastly different in future areas as it's grown and develops and really come into its own project. But like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new to, I mean, show me that you want to see more of this. And I mean, leave a comment telling me what you thought. And I will see you next time. Bye bye.